Hi guys, this will be a slightly longer video. I'll be reading out a long portion, which is one of my favorite parts of the book because it describes a very nuanced era in Indian politics. I'll tell you why. Because a socialist is pissed off with Sitaram Goel for being too communist. You never hear those things anymore. And also Sitaram Goel later on writes how socialists were his friends in their publications and writings and protests against communism. That was very interesting to read from today's perspectives. And here he writes of a situation where a socialist publication asked him to be the editor, but he took a communist line and therefore he got scolded. On my return to Calcutta, I told my employers that I was not prepared to travel anymore, job or no job. They allowed me to settle down. I was a frequent visitor to the coffee house in College Street, where I took to writing my first novel. I could not write in my small cell, which I shared with 4 other people. So I acquired a habit of writing in coffee houses, which lasted even after I had a comfortable home. It is during these sessions that I met a group of Bengali students who were members of the Congress Socialist Party, CSP. They took me to their leader, whose name I cannot recall now. He commissioned me to translate from Hindi to English some writings of Acharya Narendra Deva and Sri Jayaprakash Narayanan, so that they could be translated into Bengali. It was difficult to find a Bengali in Calcutta who could translate directly from Hindi to Bengali. I suppose the situation is same today. It is. I did the translations very fast. I agreed with every word of what these leaders of the CSP had written. These were their writings from the early 30s, when the CSP had not broken with the communists. I was not aware of the serious quarrel which had divided them from 1940 onwards. I do not know if my English translations were ever rendered into Bengali. But I earned the respect and regard of the socialist leader. He was a lean, thin and dark man of medium stature. He had been a revolutionary and had spent long years in British jails, including a spell in the Andamans. His living inside a dilapidated dwelling place in a narrow, dark lane was very austere. His shirt always had several patches on it. He sat on a small mat without any other accoutrements around him. Sometimes he smoked a bidi, but his looks were stern, and he was a man of very few words. He inspired me in a great respect bordering on awe. His confidence in me led him to suggest that I become the editor of a weekly in Hindi, which the CSP had been publishing for some time for the benefit of the Hindi-speaking people of Calcutta. I was very diffident. This was a field in which I had no earlier experience, but he encouraged me. He told me that I could not do worse than the existing editor who, in his own words, was a mere matriculate from UP. I accepted the responsibility and wrote the first editorial a few days later. It was my last for that socialist weekly. The leader could not read Hindi, but he could understand very well if something in Hindi was read out to him. He became very impatient as he listened to the earlier editor reading my piece to him. He sent for me immediately. I was expecting a pat on my back for what I had written after a great deal of thought and polishing of language. But I was taken aback when I saw the hard-lined face of the socialist leader. He asked me point blank, "Are you a communist?" On my denying the charge forcefully, he protested, "But the line you have taken in this editorial is the communist line. How do you explain that? The communists had wormed their way into our party earlier also with disastrous consequences for our party. We cannot allow that to happen again. Not in the city of Calcutta. This is not a small town where some of our comrades may get hoodwinked by clever communist talk." His temper rose as he talked. It was for the first time that I had heard him utter so many words in such a small space of time. I do not remember the subject of that editorial. It was perhaps about the cabinet mission proposals. I did not know the CSP line on the subject, or any other subject for that matter. Nor did I know the communist line except on the subject of Pakistan. I expected my friends from the coffee house to save me from the wrath of their leader, but their own looks had also become rather hostile. In my desperation, I touched the leader's feet and swore by all that I held sacred that I was innocent of any deliberate distortion. The great man cooled down immediately. He blessed me by placing both his hands on my head and asked me to come again for a discussion on different party lines. Meanwhile, I was to write no more editorials for his weekly. I never met him again. The 16th August 1946, communal riots broke out in Calcutta after a few days. I would have been killed by a Muslim mob in the early hours of that day as I walked back towards my home from the coffee house which I had found closed. My fluent Urdu and my western dress saved me. My wife and 2-year-old son had joined me a few days earlier in a small room in a big house bordering on a large Muslim locality. On the evening of the 17th, we had to vacate that house and scale a wall at the back to escape murderous Muslim mobs advancing with firearms. Had not the army moved in immediately after, I would not have lived to write what I am writing today.